identity politics is something that will destroy any political movement. And people who think that, well, we're building a community that will make itself more powerful really have to look at what has happened to past comparable movements in American history. So I'll say, there's an example. We're going to talk today about an example on the left. But on the right, I can remember during the 90s, the Republican Party strongly embraced evangelical Christians because they're very dependable donors. They vote very punctually, I guess you would say. They're very reliable to go to the voter booth. They get organized. They have, some of them have televangelist networks and things like that. And people thought for a while on the Republican side that this was great because, yes, you have money rolling in from these evangelical Christians, but in reality, what it ended up doing was it created a culture of corruption. It made the Republican Party look ridiculous because you had a lot of these people who, to be quite frank, they don't have very sophisticated views on anything besides religion and state, and talking about, issues of the gay people and whatever, talking about prayer in school, talking about God and God we trust, things that are, they are important, but beyond that, they couldn't talk about anything. A lot of them were very, superficial and one-dimensional. And that was a problem that the Republican Party dug itself into. And I don't know if they've completely dug themselves out of it. It could be that it was because of Donald Trump, ironically, that they've sort of departed from that kind of sandbar that they were run aground on. So, identity politics on the left. This was an incident that happened in 2015, and I think some of you will remember it.
You do not listen to her. Your event will be shut down right now. Right now. Bernie says that he's about the people and about grassroots movement. Let Bernie speak. Let Bernie speak. Let Bernie speak.
Give him a bullhorn.
You know which candidate for president will shut down the private prison industry.
Sorry, that was in 2015, and this is the Black Lives Matter activist, one of them, who appeared, I guess, a couple days ago. This is uploaded later by some black guy who's a YouTuber I follow. And I actually am on his Patreon, and he actually appeared on this panel. And this is what she is doing, Marissa Janae Johnson, talking about her role in activism on behalf of BLM and how it affected the presidential election.
They act on those ideas. And so for me, there's definitely a sense of urgency around the communities that I represent, and the notion that some of my people will not survive the things that are happening now. And so there's definitely a sense of urgency for me to advance the political conversation and to do political education in such a way that will hopefully reduce harm towards Black folks and that will reduce white supremacy in the world. And that's a skill set also that I naturally have. So one of the things that I focus in my activism, one is agitation work. And so if you look at any of my work, it's always about sort of stirring up the pot in an effort to move things further left, right? So like even the shutdown of Bernie Sanders, in the presidential election, there were so many things that happened that moved what was considered center further right. And I feel like our action, especially as controversial as it was one of the few things that moved the conversation further left, right? Democratic candidates had to respond and take a more leftist position on criminal justice reform, and even Republican candidates had to respond. And so my work is less so about getting people to believe exactly the same things that I believe, but more how can I push a conversation further left? How can I advance Black liberation in that way? Mm-hmm. And part of the way that I do it through the content that I create right now is taking these really big, ethereal, difficult concepts like mass incarceration or police brutality or white supremacy, and helping people boil them down to like, okay, that's cool that you watched 13th and cried about it, but what does that actually mean for you and your life, and what are the tangible steps that you could take today, no excuses, to change the world that we live in for the people who live here now and also the future. So where a lot of race education is like the idea that if we just learn more and have different ideas that will automatically change things, the work that I do takes it a step further and actually coaches people through taking pragmatic steps to end white supremacy.
I love it.
So I didn't even get to see Derek's answer because this is as far as I got in the video, but it's basically a panel between him, Marissa Janae Johnson, and this lady who's moderating, Brittany Simon. Let me tell you something. What she just described, kind of in self-praise, talking about how what she does is tell people how to pragmatically take steps to reduce white supremacy today, is really about as much, it's about as arrogant as you can get. It basically denies the actual effect of what she did do. And I'll explain why. That incident in Seattle, it took a lot of people who previously had looked at Bernie Sanders and said, well, this is an interesting candidate. And it made him look like a complete weakling. And for somebody to abandon their own rally because these two women came up there and basically rushed him off the stage, I think was one of the biggest mistakes of his presidential campaign for the broader public. Now, if you ask some people on the left, they see it as kind of a, they praise him. They say it was a sign of his humility, the fact that he's able to, accept that some issues are bigger than his campaign and everything. And I know that makes sense to some people, but that's not really what the effect was to plenty of people who were observing from the sidelines. When I see somebody basically let these women who are just loud, obnoxious, they have these ridiculous hairstyles and everything. I don't care if I'm, both her and Carly, whatever fuck her name is, Brittany Simon, Carly Simon. The fact is that those people who do who behave in this way, and they're very loud, obnoxious, and they take the podium, have not advanced the causes that they promote. They've actually set them back pretty far, and it's done much to actually propel people to the other side. The other side being people like me, being people who disagree with identity politics, being people who think that every person should be able to determine what are the issues that most affect them as an individual, not as a member of a so-called community or whatever the hell it is. And what she's done instead, people, Black Lives Matter, their objective was to unify the Black community in response to police brutality, at least at the outset. What did she say about that during that passage? I mean, the rest of the whole panel, she does address some of it, but she actually said that her objective is to move the conversation to the left, is to move everything to the left, whether it's the criminal justice conversation, literally, but what the hell does that mean? It means that if you are, for example, a person of Black heritage, African American heritage, and you, for example, own a large business, if you are a Christian pastor, if you are somebody who has in any way benefited from the way society has run its way traditionally through capitalism and business, it means that you're basically part of you're part of the piece of wood that's being put into this vice in order to be, or whatever the hell it is, in order to be turned and milled. You're basically the part that's going to be shaved off in order to create whatever the hell it is that they're going to create, because you're not part of that. You're not part of the finished product. They don't want a society where private enterprise will be the way that the economy works. They want one where it's more collective ownership of the means of production. She says she's moving the conversation to the left, and that's what she's doing. And she says that concerning Bernie Sanders, not concerning Hillary Clinton, not concerning some of the other candidates like Jim Webb and Martin O'Malley that were running that year, but concerning Bernie Sanders, who was the furthest left candidate in the Democratic Party, at least. And I think it was very detrimental to his movement. And I guess I should thank her, because I didn't want Bernie Sanders to win. And it's partially thanks to people like this, I believe that the left will never, ever, ever achieve the unity that it would need in order to actually represent people in a meaningful way. Okay, I'm afraid that they may take power in some way or another, but they will never achieve unity. They'll never achieve civility within their ranks, because you have people who are willing to go up on podiums and behave like, oh, I am the real revolutionary. Bernie Sanders he's not good enough for me. My response to her would have been this. Okay, you don't like Bernie Sanders. There's already a candidate running outside the Democratic Party, Jill Stein, who's, to some degree further to the left than him. So why don't you support her? Why don't you, instead, they want to make this into something like, if you don't agree with us, we're going to actually come in and ambush your event and behave as if you're part of the enemy. I don't think Bernie Sanders ever has expressed he's never said anything hostile to the BLM movement. And indeed, as that Al Jazeera Plus video showed, and I don't think that there's anything I disagree with on that specific video from Al Jazeera Plus. Indeed, Bernie Sanders had already been the most critical candidate towards police during that election cycle, apart maybe from Jill Stein. So, and on that note, I don't think that they differed very much at all. So what did they achieve there? Virtually nothing. In fact, what they did was to illustrate to the broader public, the people who might not necessarily have known who Bernie Sanders was, or might not necessarily have decided who they were going to vote for. They showed that this person is a weakling, that he doesn't have the actual courage to step up and say, yes, I am basically here to talk about my positions. I'll let you talk on the stage for 30 seconds, or you can come on after me. But the people here the people who are coming here to watch this rally are here to talk about Medicare for all. They're here to talk about labeling of non-GMO foods. They're here to talk about not signing the TPP. That was really the response I would have expected from somebody who was secure in his own, comfortable in his own skin. And he didn't show that. He showed a lot of awkwardness, and understandably a lot of awkwardness, but not the resolution of a leader. And it's basically the same type of activity that has gotten the left into this, the left being a broad term. Okay, so if you don't agree with this, I'm not talking about you. If you're a left-wing person and you think that this doesn't represent you, that's fine, but it does represent a large part of the left. And here's from the New Republic, which is kind of a little more center-left than the Bernie Sanders group. And they said, whose side are Asian Americans on? A proposal to integrate New York City's top public high schools could be a boon to Black and Latinx students and a disaster for Asians. This is a person, an Asian person, using the Latinx thing that every person I know who's Latino or Latina thinks is one of the dumbest innovations within the social justice movement. Nobody believes that the Spanish language, which has gender verbs and gender nouns at least, is going to change because of social justice, because people in those countries don't believe that anything is going to be accomplished by that. They're comfortable with the way the language is. So they go through this massive, polemic about how Asian students are so much better off. It says the Stuyvesant, which is the high school, has been criticized in recent years because of one stark fact. Almost no Black or Latinx students attend in the 2015 to 2016 school year. The student body was 74% Asian and 20% white. Only 3% of students were Latinx, and even less, 1% were Black. This school year, Black and Latinx students made up only 10% of offered seats across all 8 specialized high schools, despite making up nearly 70% of the city's public school population overall. Sanchez, whose parents immigrated from the Dominican Republic, is acutely aware of the disparity. This is talking about, I believe, one of the students who tried to get in there. Let me see here. Yes. So she had rarely even gone into Manhattan before high school, let alone the posh neighborhood of Tribeca where Stuyvesant is located. Entering the school itself was a culture shock, especially when it was clear many of the students already knew each other. Waiting on the bridge for the doors to open on the first day was so scary just standing there, Sanchez said. Everyone was in clusters, but I knew nobody. In June, Mayor Bill de Blasio proposed changing the admissions policies of the city's specialized high schools in order to integrate them under de Blasio's proposal. The SHSAT would be phased out over 3 years and eventually replaced with a system that automatically admits the top 7% of students from every middle school in the city based on a combination of grades and state exam scores. Now, I will say that at least makes it based somewhat on achievement, but it doesn't make it makes this high school, which is the elite high school, one of the elite high schools of New York City, it actually degrades its quality somewhat. Because this test system would have been objective across the entire city. Okay, you're not then talking about the best of the worst school would get into there. He also wants to expand the Discovery Program, which sets aside a certain number of seats for low-income students. So that is, in fact, a quota development. According to city officials, the impact of eliminating the test would be sweeping. When the new plan is fully implemented, 45% of offers would go to Black and Latinx students. In response, many in the city's Asian American community, which is represented in lopsided numbers in the city's specialized high schools, rose in protest. Spurred mainly by New York's vocal Chinese American community and alumni groups, protesters amassed outside de Blasio's office chanting, "Keep the test." They claimed that the move was racist, targeting a disadvantaged minority that historically has had little clout in New York politics compared to other minorities. Their protests were quickly plastered all over the news, adding yet another layer of racial tension to the effort to mix the most segregated school system in the country. Though the plan did not pass muster with the state legislature, it created the opening for a summer of outrage for members of the Asian community, some of it fueled by legitimate grievances. A profound sense of powerlessness, as Jiang Feng put it, sorry if I can't say the name right, in the New Yorker. Some by resentment toward other minority groups. As Kenneth Chu, president of the New York Asian American Democratic Club and one of the most outspoken leaders against de Blasio's plan, told NY1, he never had this problem when Stuyvesant was all white. He never had this problem when Stuyvesant was all Jewish. All of a sudden, they see one too many Chinese and they say, hey, it isn't right. So this is really the problem, that you will have the Asian Americans, okay, I can tell you, and I've thought about doing a video on this, but I don't know what's the right way to do it. Asian Americans have a community value system, okay? We talk sometimes negatively about community value systems, but in this case, I think it's positive. Asian Americans have a community value system that in many of these ethnic groups, because there's more than, you can't just call all of them Asian Americans. You know, there's a difference between the Chinese and the Koreans and the Laotians and the Vietnamese. But in most of these ethnic groups, they have an emphasis on education, an emphasis on a strong family, an emphasis on basically high achievement and ambition. And that's the difference. That's why they are. It's not an issue of racial genetics, I believe. It's an issue of the fact that they treat their students and their children correctly and tell them what's the correct way to proceed through life and get the best outcome out of it. It has nothing to do with whether, I mean, maybe it does, but that's not what I would say. Okay, I'm not really into this whole idea that some races are better than others. I don't care about that. And I think that the objective of the educational system is to, regardless of racial differences, create the best solution for each individual student, regardless of race. And then you have this story from the Daily Californian over at the University of Berkeley. It says a Muslim student said she felt burdened and invalidated in UC Berkeley religions course. On UC Berkeley sophomore Sabrine Abdelrahman's first day in her Abrahamic religions course, the professor Manuel Duarte de Oliveira, which would probably be some sort of Portuguese or Brazilian person, asked her if she could take criticism after introducing herself. Abdelrahman, the only Muslim student in that class, said Oliveira did not ask any of the other students a similar question. Since that first day, Abdelrahman said she felt increasingly burdened and invalidated during the course, which she took in the spring semester of 2018. I would really be dreading going to class because I never knew what he was going to ask, Abdelrahman said. Oliveira said he was shocked and surprised upon learning of Abdelrahman's complaints, which he made public in a Facebook post September 6th. So the first thing she should have done was to actually tell the instructor straight up after class or something that she has an objection to something he said. She alleged that Oliveira placed a burden of representation onto her, assigned biased and inaccurate readings about Islam, and invalidated concerns that she raised about said readings. Okay, so maybe she did raise some issues. Oliveira, however, said her post was dramatic and unfair. It was a blessing, in fact, an honor to have her in the class because this type of seminar is supposed to encourage dialogue between incoming students, Oliveira said. When we study at the university level, we are supposed to approach the views from a critical lens. Even the views that criticize our own view, we need to see if it's reasonable, if it's fair. And I agree with that statement. Abdelrahman said Oliveira would not only pose all insensitive questions during discussion, including whether or not Islam is a legitimate religion since it came chronologically after Judaism and Christianity, but that he would also select biased and in some cases inaccurate readings about Islam. Oliveira admitted to the class that he does not know much about Islam compared to the other Abrahamic religions, considering that he had only studied Islam for about 2 years and had studied Judaism and Christianity for more than 10, according to Abdelrahman. When Oliveira began teaching the Islamic unit, he allegedly told Abdelrahman that she would have to help him instruct the class. So this is the part where and you see here the fucking Planned Parenthood ad, but she says, I appreciated that he was trying to get the perspective from someone of that religion, Abdelrahman said, but it got to a point where I felt like I was the one who was teaching, not sharing my experience. It was really a burden of representation of 1.8 billion people. So this is the real issue, that she said originally that the readings that he assigned concerning Islam were inaccurate or that they were not, let me see what she said. Biased and in some cases inaccurate, but then he gives her the floor in order to present what she would consider, I guess, accurate and unbiased. And what do you know? She objected to that too. So he's trying to compromise and give her some ground on this, and she objects to that. So you can't demand to have a seat at the table and then complain when somebody offers you one. Abdelrahman did not want to report Oliveira for fear that it would affect her grade in the class, but on August 31st, she met with Deanna Kaiser-Go. Wait, I think I forgot one. None of the readings Oliveira assigned were written by Muslim scholars, Abdelrahman said. In many cases, the class was reading articles or watching lectures about Islam written and given by Jewish scholars, she added. Oliveira said he would have been able to cover a larger spectrum of views if he had more time. Abdelrahman did not want to report Oliveira for fear that it would affect her grade in the class, but on August 31st, she met with Deanna Kaiser-Go, an advisor in the campus Department of Near Eastern Studies, to report her experiences. On Monday, she met with the department's chair, Francesca Rochberg. She said Rochberg was very supportive and apologetic and made it clear that Oliveira's alleged demeanor is something not tolerated by the department. I don't know what the demeanor is. I mean, he didn't say anything directly hostile to her. My sympathies are with Sabrine, as I've already told her, Rochberg said in an email. I understand that the situation is quite complex. Oliveira had a temporary teaching contract with the campus, which has since ended, according to Rochberg. He is no longer affiliated with the department or the campus, Rochberg added in an email. these kinds of things do happen at Berkeley. Abdelrahman said, I know a lot of people are surprised by that. I was too. So this is a classic example of people getting into a course that doesn't meet their view of the world and complaining about it. I'll tell you one thing. When I was a freshman in college, I took a course called Diversity in Sports, and it wasn't very well presented. I mean, some of it was. It was a 16-week course, 8 weeks on black athletes, 8 weeks on women athletes, and 1 day, on disabled athletes. And that was diversity in sports. Black people, women, and disabled people. I wrote my final project and made the presentation about foreign-born athletes, people like Dikembe Mutombo or Vlade Divas or Tony Kukoc, Livan Hernandez. And she and I think she gave me a B on it. And I wrote to her after the semester. I said, well, diversity isn't just women, gay. It wasn't gay people. It was women, disabled people, and black people. That's not what diversity is. And I offered this to her. Maybe I could help you expand the course curriculum. Never heard a single response. I think she simply didn't like my positions on any of the issues. None of the other people in the class, by the way, the majority of whom, I was probably the only person in the course who was not a student athlete. I think I found one of those courses that's meant only for student athletes, and I registered for it, and they couldn't deregister me from it without revealing something. But none of those people, half of whom were black, actually cared about anything. They're like, yeah, that's some good points, about Cuban athletes and Mutombo. And what's the other guy? Yao Ming. So I thought I did a good job. She didn't. The rest of the class was like, yeah, this is a pretty. And by the way, their projects focused mostly on the women and black athletes, or on none of them focused on the same topic as me. And some of them were great, and some of them were not that good. But the ultimate point is that if you're going to preach diversity, don't complain when people inject some diversity that you don't like. And that's exactly the problem with Black Lives Matter. That's exactly the problem with people like the ones that are trying to, quote, desegregate the New York City schools, because then they have to go to a different community that has its own issues, that wants to have the same opportunities, like the Asian community, and say, well, you guys, you're doing too well. We want some of what you have. Then they have to go to a professor at a school and say, well, I'm not going to let you teach this course the way I want you to. I'm not going to let you teach the course the way you want to. I want, because you're teaching about something that is relevant to me, I have to be able to dictate to you how it is. And not only that, I can object to you asking me for help on that. That's about it. Please like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the other live stream channel, Razor Ray Live Wounds, and I'll see you later. Have a great Sunday and a happy rest of your week.